Welcome back to another Ask Sam. We've got a series of questions. Some of them are fairly lengthy, but I'm going to give it my best shot and try to answer them as thoroughly as I can. Marina asks, triple negative breast cancer. Is there a mechanism of action for Volasta for triple negative breast cancer? I've seen your videos for HER2 breast cancer, but wondering for this most aggressive one if Volasta could help. Absolutely, Volasta can help. Let me go through a little bit on the triple negative breast cancer first. It's usually a lack of estrogen or progesterone receptor sites. It's a more dangerous form of breast cancer. It comes from a BRCA1 gene issue. Now, BRCA1, BRCA2, and PARP are, I wasn't going to get into this, but BRCA1, BRCA2, and PARP are DNA repair mechanisms. Normal cells have all three mechanisms, BRCA1, BRCA2, and PARP. Cancer cells typically only have one, and that's PARP. So when they give you a chemo drug to destroy the DNA of a cancer cell and chemo or radiation, oftentimes they'll give you what's called a PARP inhibitor to stop the repair if that DNA is damaged in the cancer cell. It will also inhibit the PARP in a normal cell, but people who have BRCA1 and BRCA2 DNA repair mechanisms can get that normal cell DNA repaired, thereby delaying or stopping future cancer resulting from the chemo treatment. But I digress there a little bit. Let me come back to this. On the triple negative breast cancers, the primary cause of those receptors being turned off, it's not necessarily genetic. The genetic mutation is resulting from high ROS, high reactive oxygen species, mutating those portions of the DNA. And it will have an effect, and some people present differently. So your reactive oxygen level, your inflammatory disease state is exceedingly high. The best way to measure that, again, is with your high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It looks like the primary reactive oxygen species that's initiating this effect, there's two. There's the peroxyl non-radical and the hydroxyl free radical. Both of those are neutralized by the Volasta. So if your estrogen receptors and your progesterone receptors are not completely destroyed or being negated by your stress level, then Volasta will most definitely help and allow for those receptors to be re-engaged. And but just because you're genetically predisposed for triple negative does not necessarily mean that you're predisposed to get cancer. Now, the reason you may have that gene mutation is most definitely caused by, according to the National Institute of Health, your oxidative stress condition anywhere from 5 to 15 years prior to you presenting with cancer. I can't encourage people enough to go and make your doctor run the HSCRP, and that number should always, for you to have a normal life, be less than 3 milligrams per liter. And make sure the units are correct, milligrams per liter, not milligrams per deciliter. If it's reported as milligrams per deciliter, you must multiply that number by 10. And typically, a lot of what we see with triple negative breast cancer is only the result of another serious inflammatory disease caused by high concentrations of reactive oxygen species. The Volasta will neutralize those ROS, those reactive oxygen species, and it will stop this mutation in your gene that will result in breast cancer. I hope that helps. Robert asks, gallstones and Lupron. Would Volasta help in preventing or dissolving them? Volasta will not dissolve gallstones. Gallstones are typically a result of just the accumulation of bile from your liver, and there's certain toxins that will precipitate out and form concretions inside the gallbladder. Now, the gallbladder is just a storage tank. So if you're not eating enough oil or fat in your diet, the liver will produce bile, and it will not push it down through the biliary duct down into your small bowel. It will store it in your gallbladder. If your gallbladder doesn't empty, it gets dehydrated, and these gallstones or crystals will form. They're called gallstones. Once they accumulate, they will get so large they cannot get out of the gallbladder duct, and they'll set in there like a sludge, and they'll cause inflammation in your gallbladder, and it will probably eventually result in the necessity of having your gallbladder removed. So it is something to look at. Would Volasta help Lupron while fighting prostate cancer? It does. Lupron has a different pathway than the Volasta, but they both work on degrading the growth, the promotion, and the progression of prostate cancer. We're finding more and more of the interactions between some of these chemo drugs in combination with Volasta. There's several reporting, for example, with pancreatic, the gemcitabine Volasta combination seems to have a very positive effect. Cancer lives on a razor's edge anyways, and when there's a two-pronged attack on the cancer doesn't do well. So I would suggest doing both and maintaining and watching your PSA level and your C-reactive protein levels. Your PSA number, when you first start on Lupron or on Volasta, you can see an initial spike. That's usually very positive, although oncologists will interpret it as negative. It's actually very positive. It means that the cancer probably has died and all of the cancer antigens have been released into the bloodstream. And it should be followed in a week to 2 weeks with a decline in your PSA and your C-reactive protein number. That would be a very, very positive. So you see the initial climb out when the cancer cell dies, and an oncologist is going to recognize that as aggressive cancer, when in reality it's the cancer cells going into necrosis. But the difference is you'll see the climb out, and if it's aggressive cancer, it'll keep climbing out. If it's due to necrosis, it'll climb out to a maximum, tip over, and start back down again. So you'll see that that change, and once it tips over and starts back down again, then the cancer has probably died. There's not much risk at that point of any form of terminality or progression. Danielle asks, non-Hodgkin mantle cell lymphoma. She goes through here and describes, this is very typical of the despair that kicks in with these diseases, and it's tough to deal with that kind of despair when it's a loved one of yours that is suffering. But she says he is now about to start CAR-T treatment, but this is only if they can get his cancer back to start the treatment, and providing they can activate it. Chimeral cell treatment is becoming more and more effective. So I'm actually a supporter of the CAR-T treatment protocol. If this does not work, we have run out of options, and I cannot bear thinking about that. So I'm on a desperate mission to seek help, advice, and alternative treatments. Not all CAR-T treatments work. With this kind of myeloid, I believe it's a myeloid type of general cancer, the lymphoma. It's a bone marrow issue. The chemo treatments will have a tendency to destroy the bone marrow and make this a progressively worse disease. So be very, very cautious on using chemotherapies. There's some bone marrow, some radiation techniques, but it also destroys the stem cells in the bone marrow and will eventually lead to a bone marrow transplant. But in this case here, he's had a bone marrow transplant and the cancer keeps breaking through. He's obviously in a highly oxidized disease state. We got to get that under control. The Valasta will lower that number. Again, I come back to look at your oxidative disease state. Measure his HSCRP. If that number is greater than 3 milligrams per liter, the Valasta will help with this. And he'll see his blood work should begin to normalize. My concern is that the bone marrow, if it does not take, there's not a good option. I'm hoping that his bone marrow transplant is functioning at some level that will allow the lymphocytes to be produced normally. So there's no harm in doing the Valasta. There's no side effects, but there could be tremendous upside potential, especially in these types of desperate cases. Danielle, I'd like to follow up as this progresses, but I would get him on Valasta as soon as possible. Yale asks about antioxidants, diet for cancer, and Parkinson's. And I'm going to go through each one of these. It looks to be pretty extensive. Is it a bad idea to take antioxidants such as oral vitamin C at any point when someone has cancer? All antioxidants are good at reducing the free radical concentration. Vitamin C is one that's pretty good. The problem with these types of vitamins, though, is that they create an inflammatory disease state. They're what's called pro-oxidants when they're processed in the liver. So very high doses of these vitamins can lead to severe liver inflammation and increase in oxidative stress condition, leading to further disease. Valasta does not do that. Valasta is one of the only products that is not a pro-oxidant. It does not cause any further inflammation. That's why it is so valuable and is the most powerful antioxidant there. Astaxanthin, separate from Valasta, but pure astaxanthin is about 6,000 times more potent than vitamin C. The difference between the pure astaxanthin and Valasta is Valasta has the glucose or sugar attached to the astaxanthin that allows for very rapid and efficient absorption of the Valasta over the pure astaxanthin. So it's about 8-fold increase. So if you are taking 1 unit of Valasta, you would have to take the equivalent of 8 units of the pure astaxanthin that you would buy at Walmart. That's the difference. So when I compare pure astaxanthin, which is 6,000 times more potent than vitamin C, Valasta is 48,000 times more potent than vitamin C on a gram per gram basis. It's a huge, huge difference. And that's why we're seeing such high success with the Valasta. Vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, they're all processed in the liver, and they, at high dose, will cause an increase in your inflammatory disease state. So be very, very careful. If you're taking vitamins strictly for antioxidant purposes, you can stop that, and Valasta will override all of the effects of those without any of the side effects. In some cases, like vitamin D, we have vitamin D deficiencies. We take it for other reasons. Vitamin D is very important in some of the pathways. Vitamin C in the ascorbate. If you're deficient in these vitamins, then by all means take them. But to take it to stop disease, inflammatory type diseases, there's nothing that compares on the planet to Valasta. So just keep that in mind. Is it true that cancer does not survive in an oxygen environment, and taking antioxidants removes the oxygen around the cancer cells, which helps it thrive? Is this something that is specific to during chemo treatments? I'm going to answer both of those. Cancer cells do not require oxygen to survive. It only requires glucose. So when we look at this, cancer operates in an acidic environment, whereas normal cells operate in an alkaline environment, typically around 7.35 pH. Cancer cells operate in a pH range of about 5.2 to 6.5. Oxygen is not required. All cancer cells, 100% of all cancer cells, are anaerobic, which means they do not need oxygen. They only live off of sugar or some precursor of sugar, like some ketones and maybe glutamate. So but you cannot starve cancer cells by cutting out sugar. Cancer cells have a priority over your normal cells for all the sugar that your liver produces. So you cannot starve cancer cells. You will only starve your normal cells, and it will cause severe weight loss while the cancer lives on. So oxygen does help with wound healing and lesion issues. Because normal cells are aerobic, they do require oxygen. So there is some hyperbaric type treatments for wounds and burns and those kinds of things that oxygen does work. But for killing cancer, it does not work. So that is a sort of a misnomer. Oxygen won't treat your cancer, and it won't really keep you from getting cancer if your inflammatory disease state is elevated as measured by your HS-CRP. Is astaxanthin different than, let me go up there. Is this something that's specific to during chemo treatments? We are now seeing Valasta being used in conjunction with chemo treatments. It will not cancel out your chemo treatments. We really suggest that you try Valasta prior to any chemo treatment because of the detrimental, harmful effects of chemo and radiation and the long-term problems associated with the reoccurrence of cancer after chemo and after radiation. There's about an 87% probability that you'll regenerate cancer after chemo or radiation within 5 years. So it is something to consider prior to the acceptance of chemo or radiation. Is astaxanthin different than oral vitamin C in this regard? I just explained that. It's 48,000 times more potent gram for gram than normal astaxanthin, or than normal astaxanthin, But it's the most powerful antioxidant known to exist. There's no reason to be taking anything else, turmeric, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A, unless you're deficient in those in your diet. But to take it to fight reactive oxygen species and inflammatory disease, Valasta is really all you need. What type of diet do you recommend for someone that currently has cancer? The next one, there are so many different approaches out there. I've heard of low glycemic, alkaline, keto. I'll address all these in the food issue. First and foremost, make sure your doctor runs a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. Make sure that number is less than 3. You eat whatever you want as long as you keep your C-reactive protein less than 3. And that's milligrams per liter. Some are being reported as milligrams per deciliter. If it's reported as milligrams per deciliter, multiply that number by 10. And that'll give you your milligrams per liter number. But that number should be less than 3. Now, there's certain foods that you should stay away from. Low glycemic foods typically contain high levels of fructose. Fructose is a poison. Always has been, always will be. So high fructose diets in fruit, in soda drinks, should be avoided at all cost. Fructose is a sugar. It's very sweet. It's very desirable. It's what gives us our sweet flavor. But it has no nutritional value whatsoever. Fructose cannot be used by a single cell in our body. Glucose, which is glycemic, can be used by every cell in our body, including our brains. So, but fructose is not. Fructose would technically be classified as a chronic poison. The way that it's processed, fructose goes into the pancreas. Pancreas converts it into triglycerides, or what's called TAGs. Once the triglyceride level reaches about 400 milligrams per liter in our bloodstream, our liver will start to convert it into LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol. It's what causes cardiac failure, atherosclerosis, heart disease. So that's how we get high cholesterol, is from fruit or fructose. It is not from animal or animal fats. Some of it can be genetic, a predisposition of the liver to produce LDL cholesterol, but primarily it's coming from triglycerides, coming from fructose intake. Those are foods you need to avoid. And measure your HSCRP. If you see your CRP get above 3, cut those foods out. Take more Valasta. You'll knock that number back down again and reduce dramatically the probability that you'll ever get an inflammatory disease. What type of diet do you recommend for other diseases like Parkinson's, for example? Anything that produces a high C-reactive protein. Again, it's in moderation, but typically no fruit, no smoking. Remove stress from your life. Stop your worry and anxiety and stress. So whatever it takes to do that. But you can still measure your C-reactive protein. People who get Parkinson's are obviously in a high-stressed environment where they're pumping out large amounts of epinephrine, that's the fight or flight reflex, or the foods that they're eating, the high fruit content, is going to lead to Parkinson's. High sugar ingestion is going to lead to Parkinson's. And the reason now, we thought for the longest time that Parkinson's was caused by a lack of dopamine. That's not necessarily the case. What we now see as causing Parkinson's is a high concentration of oxydopamine. Oxydopamine is the product of dopamine production in the brain reacting with the hydroxyl free radical to yield oxydopamine. Oxydopamine is what we give to animals to give them Parkinson's so that we can test Parkinson's medications on. If we eliminate the hydroxyl free radical from reacting with the dopamine, Parkinson's tremors go away. You want to do this before the nerves become so damaged that it's unrecoverable. So everybody needs to be aware it's the hydroxyl free radical reaction with dopamine that's causing Parkinson's. And Volasta stops that hydroxyl free radical. We've got tens of clients that are Parkinson's taking Volasta, probably 50 people, and their tremors stop. Their ability to function improves. Their hallucinations go away. Their ability to sleep at night improves. It's that hydroxyl free radical and the elimination of that Volasta does so well. And then down here on, are there foods that trigger inflammation? I've gone through those, but everyone should be running their C-reactive protein and adjusting their lifestyle to keep that number under 3. Payem asks, endometrial cancer, tamoxifen, and Megestrol. I just recently purchased Volasta for my wife, Melissa, who has endometrial cancer. Unfortunately, her cancer has returned after a year and a half this time around. They're calling it grade 1. Her doctor is recommending hormonal therapy. My question is, are you familiar with these drugs? Is it okay to take Volasta to either help with the cancer or at least help with the side effects of those drugs? Tamoxifen, I'm familiar with. Megestrol, which I think is a diol type of steroid. I'm not all that familiar with that one. Tamoxifen was typically given as a prevention for breast cancers and for those who were predisposed for breast cancers, and it seemed to work pretty well. I believe it's a hormone receptor. It has some sort of an effect on the receptors of estrogen or progesterone. So I understand why they're recommending it. The cancers themselves, it would be well worthwhile to see what the person's oxidative stress condition. I know, Melissa, you're probably under a lot of stress with this. That stress is only going to exacerbate the inflammatory disease state that you're in. So it's easy for me to say, but the epinephrine and norepinephrine released in a stressful condition like this really needs to be mitigated as best you can, and try to keep it under control. Now, tamoxifen may work. It depends on whether this is a receptor-related type cancer. But if we can measure the hydroxyl free radical concentration, your stress level, through what's called the HSCRP, keep that number under 3. I have a feeling it's probably quite elevated. In that regard, Volasta will help. It will not interfere. There's no contraindication with tamoxifen. So it will not interfere with that drug at all. As a matter of fact, it will work in conjunction with it. And it will be a two-edged attack on the cancer cell, both driving the cancer into remission. So I would highly suggest that you use both in combination. Neither one will have any sort of effect on the other. They will probably enhance the kill of the cancer. But I think that you would probably have a very positive outcome in using them in combination. I hope that helps. And with that, I'm going to close, and we'll do this again next week. We'll get some more questions and keep them coming. Thank you very much.